And in this presentation today, we'll show you how easy it is to quickly generate a set of 2D layout documents from your 3D models using the new formZ layout application. We'll begin with this existing 3D design concept that was created by Tony Wen. This project, called the single surface house, consists of a single curving form that transitions from floor to ceiling while overlapping and converging between the different elevations. This 3D model should make a great example for highlighting the new powerful formZ 2D layout application. It should be mentioned that your 2D layout can be linked to your 3D model, so any changes to your model are automatically updated in your layout. And as of formZ 8.5, you now have the ability to use title block templates. This gives you the ability to customize your own dictionary definitions that automatically fill in your title block information for all sheets in your project. formZ can automatically generate hatch patterns when you create floor plans and cross sections, saving you valuable time. Layout lets you fully annotate your design with line styles, line weights, images, graphics, and anything else you need for a complete set of 2D layout documents. So with that, let's launch formZ and see for yourself how easy it is to create your own 2D layout in formZ. We'll begin by launching formZ Pro, the 3D modeler, and we will open up Tony Wen's 3D model, which was modeled and rendered all inside of formZ. Now our goal here today is to take this 3D information and convert it into a set of 2D layout documents. And we do that by going to the File pull-down menu. We'll choose New Layout Project, and when we do that, it'll launch the formZ layout application, and that is a separate standalone application. We can either access it directly here from the 3D modeler, or we can just run the 2D layout program all by itself. It's a separate app. You can go into the application folder and just launch the program by itself. You don't have to have a 3D model running. Okay, so we begin to create our layout by first choosing a paper size. We can choose any of the industry standard paper sizes that we have here. Let's choose architectural E size. We can choose whether we're going to be working in an English or a metric system. And down here we can turn on the title block option so we can have our title blocks automatically filled in for us. So I'll turn that on, and let's load any standard FML file, which will be our title block. And so if I go and look inside of my folder here, I already have one that's saved, and actually formZ comes with all sorts of industry standard title blocks that are already set up. You can use those as is, or you can use those and create your own from that. Anyways, I'm choosing this FML file, and I'm going to control where I'm going to place it, so I put the placement option on. I'll have it centered right in the middle of the sheet of paper. Now there's also the dictionary button, and what that does is gives us different types of dictionary names that can automatically fill in that information inside of your title blocks. Now there's a bunch of default names that are here, and you can customize this any way that you want. So inside of that title block is a variable field that's called project author, and it's between the left and right chevrons. Fill in that information right now so that every sheet of paper that I add to my project will automatically be filled in with that info. Okay, click the OK button. And if we're ready to go, click the OK button. We have our first sheet of paper added to our 2D layout document. You see that the title block has automatically been added to our project, and it's automatically filled in sheet number information and any other fields that we automatically defined inside of our dictionary definitions. Okay, so you can see here, if I go to the Sheets palette, let's drag that up a little bit, and I'll add another sheet of paper by clicking the green plus button. There we go. And now we have a second sheet. And you can see as I'm adding more and more, you can see that it's including all that information for us. All right, so now we're going to ask, what if we want to change our title block now? We want to change some information on there, customize it, maybe use a different type of title block. Well, how do we change that? Well, you can't edit it inside of the layout because it's like an externally linked component sort of, and so you can't edit anything here. So what you need to do is just simply open up that FML file. Here's the one that I'm using. And we're opening up just a standard FML file. And so this is the actual title block template that we're using for all of our sheets of paper. So we can customize this any way that we want. Let's zoom into the right-hand corner here. See, let's get rid of that logo text there and actually place an image here. Using the content tools, I can place an image into our document. I'll just use the formZ logo. And if I want to change the size of that, I can select the pick tool, right-click and show controls. I get a set of controls that I can use to further modify the shape of that image, that graphical image that's being placed on that layout. If I hold down the Shift key, You can see it'll lock the horizontal and vertical ratio there, so I can keep the same ratio of that image by holding down the Shift key. All right, we can do anything we want. We can create our own title block. I just happen to use this as an actual template, but we can draw using all the drawing tools and add information. I'm going to add another dictionary definition here. So I'm going to select the vector line tool and draw another line across here. And remember, this is the custom title block that I'm creating here that'll be used in all of my title blocks. And I can just use note text to create some note text anywhere that I want. I'm just going to copy one of these existing note text items that we have there and place it right there. And then if I were to select that note text item with the pick tool, inside of the tool options over here on the right, I go into the parameters, and you can see that the dictionary definition is a variable that's enclosed between the left and right chevrons here. So I'm going to put in my own variable here. Let's call it company name. And there we go. Apply. And there we go. Now we would put in our own field inside of that title block. Okay, so when we think we're done with all the changes we want for our customized title block, I'm going to save that. And I'm going to close it. So now when I go back to my project, there's a dialog pops up that says, hey, something's changed here, and says that the actual title block has changed. And so to update that, just click the OK button, and any changes we've made to that standard template title block will then be applied. All of the title blocks that are in all of my sheets of paper in my layout. So there, that's how easy it is to be able to modify that. Now you're looking at this and saying, okay, well, it updated, but notice I got the field and that's not filled in. Well, because that dictionary definition didn't exist yet. So we need to go ahead and define the value. So let's go back into the file, pull down into the project settings. And inside of here is where we go back into the dictionary button, and you can see company name. That's not one of the default names here, so I'll have to add my own. So click the green plus button, and I'm going to tell it what my definition name is here. So let's type it in exactly the same. Company name. All right, and what do we want the value for that to be? Well, place in whatever we want it to be, Autodesk Inc. Click the OK button, and now when we look in our project, you can see that all of the title blocks have been updated with whatever the new definition is there that we defined for the title block template. I would also like to mention that you can actually temporarily turn these on and off if you want also. So for example, if we go back into the project settings, you can see here that if we turn the title block option off, it still remembers the title block that we last used and all the dictionary definitions and all that information. But now we can sort of clear up our sheets of paper as we put our layout documentation stuff in there. We don't have to look at those title blocks. When we're ready to print this out or export this out as a PDF file, then we probably want those back on. So we can go back into project settings, we turn the title block option back on. Now all of them are turned back on. And that's how easy it is to incorporate the new title block templates into your layout documentation. Now let's add some content. Before we do that, let's save the file. Let's call it single surface house layout. And also notice that it has the extension of .fml. And so whether you're creating title blocks, those are FML files. The layout documentation is FML files also. These are separate from the 3D files, which are formZ files. Okay, now at this point, we're going to add some content using the content tools that we see here. One of them is the frame tool. So we can just simply draw a frame of any size, and then we get a frame parameters dialog, which tells us what do we want to see inside of that frame. The frame is a window into your 3D model. And so we will open a 3D model. Okay, so we'll select the single surface house, and from there we will select the view that we want to see. So we can do any of the standard views, top, front, right, left, or any views that are saved inside of that 3D model. Let's start off with just a standard front view, and we'll give it the scale that we want. How about 1/4 inch equals a foot? That seems good. Click OK. And there it is. We now have a 2D flat representation view of that 3D model. These are just 2D flat lines, splines, and arcs, because your layout project is a 2D XY world only. Now, just to sort of show that this is linked to the 3D model, I'm going to switch back to the 3D model here and make a really quick change. let's say we want to hold up this cantilevered section of the building here with an additional column. So I'll just add another object into the scene here. About there. And there we go. I have the column back in there. Alright, so at this point I'm going to resave the 3D model. And then if I go back into my layout application, it'll then sense that the 3D model has changed. And so it'll give me this message here. So OK. Click the OK button. And of course it'll update and regenerate all your frames so that all your frames stay in sync with any adjustments made to your 3D model. So we can see the information for the column is now placed there. Okay, we can also place multiple frames at the same time using the multiple frame tool. So I create one frame, and inside that frame it's going to automatically generate multiple frames based on the layout that we choose over here. So let's have a front view in this window. Let's have a back view over here. Right, left, you can set different scales and different information for each of those frames. So here we can actually generate 4 frames simultaneously. So this will help to speed up the layout process. We can also add image data, just like we did when we were updating the logo image in our title block. We use the exact same tool here in our layout document. Just use the image tool, and instead of the formZ logo, we're going to find a rendered image of that project. Here it is right there. And then we're going to place that in the scene. Now, of course, I could just place it and show controls and stretch that thing any size that I want, but you can also type in numeric information and scales over here in the tool options palette. So if I want it to be a certain size, I can type in values for that over here. And that's how you can add some content to your layout document. Next, let's look at how we can create cross sections and floor plans and add those into our 2D layout documentation. So let's add another sheet of paper. Click the green plus button. It's our third sheet that we're adding to our layout. I click the first column here next to that sheet. It actually zooms in right to that sheet. And right here, we want to put let's say a first floor plan. And so what we'll do is use the frame tool. We'll create a very large frame. Let's take up the whole sheet of paper with this. And there's actually 3 different methods that we can use. The first one is to use the floor plan option. And when we use the floor plan option, just give it an elevation height. So it'll cut a specific 2D floor plan elevation up in the Z height direction of your model based on the elevation that you give it here. So let's cut one at 5 feet. And because we have such a large frame here, I'm going to give this a larger scale, about a 1/2 inch equals a foot. Click the OK button. And there we go. We have our first floor plan. Now let's do a second story plan. So we'll add another sheet of paper. Click the green plus button over here and click the red dot here next to sheet 4, so we're zoomed into that. Now we could create another frame and give it a different elevation, or one thing I like to show is you can actually copy frames. So if I use the move with the copy option, I can take this existing frame that we have right there and move and copy it into this piece of paper over here. And there we go. So it copies all of the parameters, so it's the exact same floor plan here. So if we use the pick tool and right click on that and show parameters, we can edit any of the parameters of that frame. So instead of leaving it at the 5 feet as in the previous frame, I'm going to set this to 16 feet. And then I click OK, and now we can automatically update that copied frame with some new parameter information. All right, I'd like to mention a couple things. There are many different ways that we can control the frame contents. We can use the move tool directly on what's inside of that frame. We can move that around. Some other options we have is if you were to select the pick tool, right click on the frame, go into the parameters, there is a keep content centered in frame option. So when you're setting the actual scale, if you turn this on, then no matter what you do, if it ever has to regenerate, it'll always keep it centered inside of that frame. Okay, and I probably should mention too, there's also some other options if you right click on a frame. So if I have the pick tool active, I right click on it, you can see that we can match frame so that the frame scales down to match the content that's inside the frame. You can center it without actually turning that option on over here. You can actually turn that option permanently on there. So there's a lot of different ways to orientate how that content is going to show up inside of that frame there. Okay. All right, so that's our first method, using the floor plan option to be able to cut floor plans of our model. Now the second method is to use the clipping planes that are in your 3D model. So let's take a look at that. Let's go to our 3D model. And there is a clipping planes pellet located right here. And if I want to add one, I click the green plus button and I can add as many clipping planes as I want. I already have 2 of them here. If I click on the red dot in the first column here, it turns that clipping plane on. And this is a non-destructive plane, which lets us visualize that 3D model. And we can create as many of these as we want for our project. So here's a second one over here. I can give those any name that I want. Now, of course, I save those in the project. And then when I go into layout mode, I can use those. So let's go into the first sheet of paper here. I'm going to maybe choose this existing frame that's already here. And I'm going to right click on that and show parameters. And you can see this is a front view, but you can see down here we have some other options here. We can turn different layers on and off, so we don't have to look at all the content that's in your 3D model. And we also have a clipping planes tab, and you can see it'll list any clipping planes that you have inside of your 3D project. So if I turn one or multiple planes on, I can turn those on here, and now you can see it'll regenerate that frame with that clipping plane turned on. So now I have a nice cross-section view of that building using that particular clipping plane that's in the 3D model. So that is the second method. And I said there was 3, so let's look at the third method. Actually, the third method is sort of a variant of what we just saw here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a brand new frame, place it right there, and instead of choosing a view, I'm going to use the section option. And the section forces us to select a particular clipping plane. And so based on the plane that I choose, you can see that the view will automatically be perpendicular to at the orientation of that clipping plane. So I don't define an actual view. The view will be defined by the orientation of the plane. Let's give it a scale that we want. And click OK, and now we're going to regenerate another frame. And notice that the view is automatically positioned based on where that clipping plane was located in that 3D model. So now we have a different section view coming in from the right side. Now, one more thing I want to mention about these is that we do have a plan-only option. Here, in all the section cuts that we've done up to this point, and even in the floor plans here, we can see everything that is behind that. And if you want just a clear 2D plane cut only, we can actually go into the parameters, and you see, like in the first story cut here, there's a plan only option, and if I turn that on, then you can see all we get is a 2D paper thin slice. The actual contents is whatever is the slice at that particular elevation. You don't see anything in front or behind that particular cutting plane. Go back into parameters. I'm going to turn it off. Then you can see that we get our 2D section cut, but we can still see everything that is underneath. So you have those options too that are available when you're dealing with floor plans and cross sections. Next, I would like to expand a little bit on the capabilities you have with being able to adjust the frame and the frame contents. We looked at that briefly, so let's look at all the different options we have available to us. One is we can use the move tool to move the actual frame itself. And when we move, you can see that the contents remains at its current position inside that frame. We can also change the size of the frame. If you turn on the Show Controls option, that's where we can actually control how much of the 3D model we're seeing inside of that actual view. And we can also copy frames. So if you use the move with the copy option, like we shown with the first and second story, we can move and make copies of our existing frames. Now, as for the frame contents itself, we can move the actual contents. So if I were to use the move tool, I can grab that and move that anywhere that I want inside of that frame. And we also have the options, as we saw, to keep things centered inside of the right-click pull-down menu or within the parameters over here. And we also have the ability to ungroup, which in a sense is going to break the link with the 3D model. There are cases where you may want to break that link, and what you can do is just simply right-click in the contents, because you can see it all is contained as one group of entities. And so what we can do is choose ungroup, and now what it does is separates that into just a bunch of separate lines, splines, and arcs, and then we can manipulate the frame contents from there. So for example, if I were to move some of the entities here, you can see that it has now been separated out. So we have the different lines. So that's a little bit of a update on different ways that we can adjust the frame and the frame contents. Now let's look at how we can annotate our model using dimensions. All the dimension tools are located. Well, there's text information here, and there's some dimensioning tools located over here. So let's go to our first floor plan and do a linear dimension. And these can be associated to the frame contents, so I can actually snap right to the endpoints here. And that one linear dimension, you can use the guides to either go parallel, horizontal, or perpendicular, vertical based on the guides that you're actually snapping on for that one linear dimension. And if we do a multiple dimension, we click multiple locations here, and then I'll double click 1, 2, and now we can place multiple dimensions there. And of course, regardless of which dimensioning tool I'm using, I just use those guides to control the orientation of those dimensions. Now for the arc tool, the radial arc tool, there is lines, splines, and arcs that are brought into the 3D world, so you can see it's automatically recognizing any arc information that's there in your 3D model. All right, now let's say we want to change some of the dimensional information that we have here. Well, if I were to select one of those dimensions, look up here in the tool options, go into the parameters tab, you can see these are using the default style. If I choose the edit styles option, it brings us into the dimensions dialog here. There's a couple of other dimension styles that are already here, and these have come from our title block. If we want to create our own, just click the green plus button, and we're going to create our own dimension style. Let's call this Matt Style 1. Now don't hit return, that's the same as the OK button, so I'm going to click in a blank area here to accept that name. I can change anything that I want. You can't change the default style, that's locked, so if you want to customize it, you'll have to create your own here. And if you want, you can actually load dimension styles from another FML project or a formZ file or a formZ Junior file, so you can store those and load those into the project. But here we're just going to create one from scratch. So we can adjust some of the parameters, such as the type of arrows or the terminator shapes and things like that. Now here's something that's a very useful feature down here. The actual dimensions that you see, whether it's in architectural or decimal units, if you choose the use project option, then if you're placing dimensions on a 3D model, it'll use whatever is saved in that 3D model. If you use the custom option, then if you go in the options button, you can choose any type of custom English or metric or numeric system for the dimension that you're actually using. So let's make this one architectural, a certain number of decimal places and accuracy and things like that. So this is a custom style used just in this style here. You can add as many styles as you want. And once we have all that set up, we click OK, and you can see that has now been updated to that brand new style. Now if you want to change other dimensions to that same style, all you have to do is select all of the other dimensions. And then over here, you can see right now it's telling me all these are of the default style, so I'll just choose the Matt Style 1, and whatever I have selected will then be changed over to that style. All right. Now I should mention too that any of the dimensions that we're placing here, you can see that it is taking the model space unit, so it is looking at the actual model space. And if I were to create some other dimensions that are not associated, and if I create them inside of the frame here, this frame has an actual scale to it, and so you can see if I were to generate another dimension here, even though I'm not snapping to any of the contents here, it is still taking on the world model space units here, so that's 14 feet. But if I were to draw a dimension outside of that frame, for example over here, let's put one about the same distance here, you can see that is coming up only about 7 7/8 of an inch, which is the actual true paper space size. So any dimensions that you place inside of the frame will take on the model space size. Okay. And I partially mentioned too that you can associate and non-associate dimensions to your models on the fly. You can just simply go in and take this existing dimension that we have here. We have the show controls option. I could actually take this and maybe snap this to this point of the content over there, and I can take this end of that dimension and snap it. I'm just randomly snapping a spot over here, and now you can see that dimension is now officially associated to the 3D content there. So you can associate or non-associate dimensions based on whether the endpoints are being snapped to something. Okay. Now you can also draw these dimensions anywhere, just like we saw over here, and we can actually override the actual contents inside of there too. So let's say, for example, we would like to add some prefix or suffix information to this dimension that we have right there. Well, if you were to select that using the pick tool, look over here in tool options, you can see that the custom text field, if you have a left and right chevron there, that says the actual text information is going to be the actual unit information, the actual dimensional text of that length. And so I can add a prefix or suffix there, and I'm just going to put maybe reference here. And then when I add that, you can see that that text information is added to that. Okay. Or if you just wanted to get rid of the chevrons there, I can just type in 20 feet reference. And you can see it'll put in whatever I type in, even though that's not really 20 feet. So you can update that information there. Okay. So and that also works in outside of the frame too, like we said. So for example, on the image over here, if I want to place a dimension up here, I could say, well, let's put a dimension in the paper space mode because that's not attached to any 3D model. There's no link to a 3D model here. So it's saying that's about 18 inches there, or 16 inches, right? So I can go in there and just modify some information here and get rid of the real paper space information, type in my own number information, and there we go. We can update that there. All right, so that's just a real quick look at some ways that we can quickly annotate our layout in the formZ layout application. By looking at a few of the different graphic options we have available to us for being able to control the actual graphical content that gets derived inside of the frames that are here for things such as transparency and hatch patterns and line styles, line weights, and hidden edges and things like that. What I'd like to do is go back to the 3D model. You can see that if we do a hidden line rendering here inside of our 3D model, you can see it's live interactive spinning of our hidden line view that we have here. And if we were to look at the options for that, hit the F9 key or go into the display options here, you can see that there's a lot of options that control that hidden line rendering process. And all these same options also apply inside of your 2D layout world. And so all the options, you can turn those on and off inside of the layout space also. For example, one would be transparency. So if I look at the show transparent objects option here, you can see it's showing all the transparent objects as solid objects. If I show them as wireframe, then I click the update button. You can see that any materials that are transparent, you can see that I can actually see through those transparent objects and see into the actual model. So sometimes you need to have that ability in a hidden line rendering, and sometimes you also need that inside of your layout document. So let's see how we can do that inside of layout. So I'll go in and let's take this existing view that we have right here, and I'm going to update that. I'm going to right click and show parameters. And let's just make this a 3D view. Let's choose this view that's already saved in the model right there. And instead of a scale, I'm just going to choose fit. And let's click the OK button and let that thing generate. And what we should get is a 3D view that'll automatically fit that frame. You can see all the window panes are opaque. We can't see through that. If for some reason we want to see through some sort of glass material that's in our design as we're laying it out, then we can go into the parameters. And all that information is located in the graphics section right here in the frame parameters. And here's we can choose between lines, splines, and arcs, or we can have other lines being polylines or just plain lines. So if you want to be able to annotate true splines and arcs, make sure that this is the option that's set, and that is the default setting. Now for additional options beyond that, you click the options button, and you should recognize that all of these are the exact same hidden line rendering options that are in the 3D model. So it'll carry all that stuff over here. So, but we can also override that. The transparent option, I can change that to be the wireframe option. So any transparent objects will show up as just wireframe objects. I click OK, and now you can see we can see through all those transparent objects. Now let's talk about hatches and line styles. As we zoom into sheet number 3 here, we can see that all the line style information that's in the 3D model is automatically brought into the layout space. And also there's automatic hatching going on here for all the cross-section and floor plan information that we have. So let's see how that is done. Now to simplify that, I'm going to go back to formZ, and I'm going to choose a different model here. It's a simpler model, so we can clearly see the different techniques that are available to you for being able to add hatch information to your 3D model. Now there's basically 3 ways of doing that. The hatch tools are located right here. And if I click on the hatch tool, you can see we get a hatch palette with all standard hatch patterns here. And you can load any standard PAT file. Now formZ comes with a bunch of hatch patterns that are already set up for you, or you can load a PAT file. Now to apply them to the object, just select the one that you want, for example this hatch pattern here, and just drag and drop it onto the object. So that's the first method, and it applies it to every face of that object. Or you can use the actual hatch tool if you're using the hatch tool, instead of the drag and drop, just make the tool active, select the hatch that you want, click on that object, and that hatch then is applied to every face of that object. Now, what if you want that hatch to be located just on one face of the object or just a couple faces of the object? Well, we can use the same method, but we'll hold down the Command key on Mac or the Control key on Windows to select just the face. So if I were to select this hatch pattern here, I'm going to hold down the Command key since I'm on Mac. If you're on Windows, hold down the Control key. And I'm going to drag and drop it, and notice that that's applied just to that face only, so no other faces of the object. And if we're using the actual hatch tool, we do the same thing. We select the hatch that we want, let's say some lines, and then instead of clicking on the whole object here, I'm going to hold down the Command key on Mac or Control on Windows, and then with the hatch tool, I'll click on just that face. So now the hatch is added, it's just the one face. So there, that's how we can add hatches either to the whole object or just the face of the object. If we want to edit the hatch, there's an Edit Hatch tool. You click on any face that already has the hatch information there. And from here, we can actually use this little widget handle to rotate and move that hatch. There's a little guide so you can snap it exactly 90 if you want, or any angle that you actually need. You can drag the handle of that hatch edit guide up or down to move the position and rotation of how the hatch is located on that face. And of course, in tool options, there's additional parameters for controlling scale and color and things like that. All right, so that's two of the methods. I said there's three. The third one is to add a hatch pattern as a cross-section attribute. So when we cut a cross-section through our walls, that's how we can see the hatching information in that cross-section. So how is that created? Well, if I were to select one of these objects, let's say walls here, go into the Tool Options palette here and click on the Attributes tab, and there's a list of different attributes we can change, and one of them is cross-section attributes. And so this can control the color, line weight, and the hatching information. Now normally this is off, so normally objects do not have a hatch if you were to cross-section them. So if you turn this on, you can drag and drop any of the hatch patterns here, and that will automatically show up. Now we don't see anything here because there's no cross-section, but if we were to go and bring up our clipping planes palette again, you can see that there is a clipping plane here that's already defined. I'll turn that on, and then now that we're cutting a cross-section, we can see the hatch information that is a cross-section attribute of that object. And of course, all this hatching information carries over into the 2D layout space. So I'm going to turn that clipping plane off, and let's see that in action. So I'm going to create a separate new layout project for this different building that we have here, and I'm not going to use any title block. So let's do a frame, and I'm going to load a different model now. This other formZ file, you can actually have in the same layout document, you can have multiple 3D models all linked as different frames inside of that single layout project. But I'm going to choose the villa here, and I'm going to do a front view and leave the scale as is, click OK. And now you can see we don't have any of the hatching information. Why is that? Because I didn't save the file. So let that be a lesson to you. So let's go back. So we made all these changes over here, but the file isn't saved. So the layout has no idea that the formZ file that's saved has that information in there. So let's save it. And I'm going to go back to layout. It says, the formZ file has changed. And now the hatching information that's in there will now be embedded inside of the 2D layout document. We have a hatch pattern on the objects and the faces. Let's take a look at that cross-section hatch that we had. Let's create another sheet of paper. And I'm going to do another frame here. And let's do a floor plan. Or I'll tell you what, let's do a top view. And let's use a clipping plane. And leave it at that scale, and that's fine. And now we have cross-section. All this hatching information is automatically derived for us. That's great. So that's three methods. There's actually a fourth. You can actually create hatching inside of the 2D layout space. All the same hatching tools are here also. So if we were to go in and see, there's a hatch edit tool, there's a hatch palette, but the only thing with this is that this can only be defined within an element that's in the 2D layout. So you can't add hatching to the frame contents because of the fact that the contents is one single grouped object. So you would have to ungroup that to be able to manually hatch the different areas that are here. That's why it's a lot easier and quicker and faster and more efficient to add that hatching information in the actual 3D model. But if you want to add hatching here in 2D layout, sure. For example, let's say we want to put some hatching to represent some kind of a ground plane. So I'll just draw a vector line and just create some zigzag shape. And now we have a line drawn in layout space. So I'll just drag a hatch pattern on there and put a little ground cover on there. So we got hatching coming from the 3D model and hatching that's defined within the 2D layout space. And one last thing I'd like to show is the ability to show hidden edges in both the 3D model and in the 2D layout space. Notice in this product we have here, we have hidden line rendering without the show hidden edges. And if I go up to this view right here, we have the show hidden edges turned on. So we can see the additional back edges there represented by a different line style. And if I go to display pull down, display options, or hit the F9 key, you can see that that is just an on-off option to show the hidden lines. Here's a line style, and you can show the back faces also if you want. So this is in the 3D, and if you go into your 2D layout document, go into that options, you'll see these exact same parameters. And that's how easy it is to quickly create a 2D layout from your 3D models in formZ. Here's some additional examples of some of the layout drawing documents in formZ. So hopefully with this short example, you'll be able to create your own 2D layout in no time using the new and improved formZ layout application. Thank you for watching.